One might argue that if the young king of Ashriv had simply held his tongue, none of what followed would ever have happened. But then again, a wolf cannot unsmell his own mate, and Varric of Ashriv had the singular misfortune of finding his, standing at the wrong end of a hall packed with people he could not afford to offend. So, really, if you followed the whole ruin back to its root, the fault was his, every last thread of it. Nev had spent 19 quiet winters being no one in particular. A scentless girl who carried water and scrubbed the flags of the moot hall, and had long ago made her peace with going unseen. She was good at unseen. She had been raised to it the way other pups were raised to the hunt, and she would have gone on being no one for the rest of her small life, if only the king had kept his mouth shut. The hall of Duncurrow had not been so crowded since they burned the old king. Every bench was full, and the ones who could not find a bench stood 3 deep along the cold stone walls, because tonight, 2 packs who had spent 9 years killing each other along the river marches were about to agree to stop. There was to be a binding. The young king of Ashriv would take Solene of the Vibos to wife, and her father would call his raiders home, and the boys who had not yet died in the reeds would be allowed to grow old instead. That was the whole of it, a marriage traded for a peace. Nobody in that hall cared a whit for love, and everyone in it cared a great deal for their sons. Neve cared only about the tray. She had been given the honor, if you could call it that, of carrying the ceremonial cup along the high table, and she had spent the afternoon terrified she would drop it. She kept to the shadow of the pillars where she belonged, a plain thing in plain gray, and she watched the king the way everyone watched the king, which was to say hungrily, and from a safe distance. He was younger than a king ought to be and wore it badly, or perhaps too well. Varric of Ashriv stood at the head of the dais with his hands loose at his sides and a stillness on him that the other wolves did not have, the stillness of an animal that has never once had to prove it was the largest in the room. When he spoke the vow of welcome to the northern pack, his voice went out level and easy over 300 held breaths. Solene stood across from him, pale and straight and lovely in the way of a knife, and she did not look at him with anything warmer than duty. It did not matter, duty was the point. Then the king stopped speaking in the middle of a word. Neve felt it before she understood it, a change in the air of the hall, the way a room changes when a door has opened somewhere behind you. The king had gone rigid, his nostrils flared once. His head came up like a hound's, and something moved behind his easy face that had never been invited there, something raw and animal and entirely beyond his choosing. He turned from the princess. He turned from the peace. He came down off the dais. The hall did not breathe. Kings did not leave the binding right halfway through the binding. His warden started forward with a low warning word, and the king did not so much as slow. He came through the packed benches like a man walking in his sleep, and the crowd parted for him, and then closed behind him, and every eye in that vast, cold room followed the line of his hunger to see where it would land. It landed on the girl in gray, by the pillar. Neva's first thought, absurd and clear, was that she had dropped the cup after all, and then she realized she had not. She was only holding it against her chest like a shield. The king stood before her close enough to touch. Up near him, she understood for the first time the size of what he was. The weight of a true alpha turned entirely upon her, and her own blood answered it in a way she had no name for. A bright, unbearable pull toward him that seemed to come from under her very ribs. His eyes found hers. They were the gray of weather. For one whole breath, in front of the 2 gathered packs, and the peace, and the princess, and the world, the king of Ashriv looked at a scullery girl as though she were the only thing in it that had ever been real. She saw the moment he knew. She saw it because she felt the same knowing crack open in herself. Mate. The word had no business in her mouth. It belonged to nobles and legends, to wolves with names and land, not to a nameless thing who mopped his floors. And yet, there it was, singing in her marrow, terrible and total and true. Then the warden reached the king's shoulder and put his mouth to the king's ear, and whatever he said, Nev watched it work on Varric's face like frost across a window. The rawness went out of him. The stillness came back down, colder now, and something in his jaw set hard as a closed gate. He stepped back from her. "No," the king said. He said it quietly, but the hall was so silent that quietly was enough. He said it again, louder, for the room, for the northern pack, for the princess watching from the dais with her chin lifted. "She is not my mate. She is a servant, and she is nothing to me." His voice did not shake. That was the cruelest part, that it did not shake. Remove her. And Nev, who had been raised her whole life to expect exactly nothing, discovered in that instant that she had been wrong, that some small starved thing in her had been hoping after all, because she felt it die. Hands closed. The cup fell. It did not shatter. It only rolled away across the flags, ringing and ringing, the loudest sound in the whole enormous room, while the king who had just called her nothing turned his back and walked toward his piece, and did not once look to see where she was taken. They put her out through the kitchen door like slops. Nev did not fight the hands that carried her. There was no point, and besides, she could not have fought if she had wanted to, because the thing that had cracked open in the hall had not closed again, and it was tearing at her from the inside. She had heard the older women speak of it in the way people speak of drownings and hard births, the pain of a bond struck and then refused. She had never believed a thing could hurt so much and leave no mark. She climbed the back stair to the cold attic that was hers, and she folded down onto the pallet, and she pressed both fists to her breastbone and breathed through her teeth, until the worst of it passed. And even then it did not pass. It only banked itself low like a coal. She did not weep. She was almost proud of that. She had learned long ago that weeping changed nothing and only left you tired for the next thing. The next thing came on the stair a little after the moon had cleared the wall. She knew the tread before the door opened, slow, even unhurried, the tread of a man who had never in his life needed to rush, because the whole keep waited on him and always had. The warden Casimir stooped his tall frame under her low doorway and stood looking down at her with his hands folded, and his long, clever face arranged into something a stranger might have mistaken for kindness. "Foolish girl," he said not unkindly, "I did warn you to stay behind the pillars." He had raised her. In the way a man raises a hound, he means to keep useful. He had found her half-starved at 9 winters old, and given her a roof and a name to answer to, and in return he had taught her, patiently, over and over, across all the years between, the one lesson she had never been allowed to forget. A wolf with no scent is only half a wolf. Be small, be quiet, be grateful, you are tolerated at all. She had built her whole self on that lesson, the way a house is built on a stone. "He named you before the northern pack," Casimir said now, and for just a breath something flickered behind his eyes. That was not kindness at all. That was cold and swift and calculating. Gone before she could be sure she had seen it. That was careless of him, and careless of you, to be seen. He crouched so that his eyes were level with hers. "Listen to me. You will forget what happened in that hall. He already has. Whatever you thought you felt was a scent trick, and a girl's foolishness, nothing more. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she said, because she had always said yes to him. "Good." He rose satisfied, and smoothed his robe, and left her in his even tread, went back down the stair, and away. She sat a long while in the dark after that, turning the coal of the bond over and over, and somewhere in the turning, a small and dangerous thought crept in, that she had never once let herself think before. He named me. Whatever else was a lie, that had been true. For one breath, before the fear and the warden's whisper had closed his face like a shutter, the largest wolf in the world had looked at a scullery girl by a pillar, and known her wholly, the way no soul in 19 winters had ever troubled to. She had spent her whole life being told she was half a thing, a scent-blind mistake, to be tolerated, so long as she stayed low and quiet, and out of the light. And for that single breath in the crowded hall, someone had looked at the entire of her, and found it worth crossing a room for. No amount of grateful smallness could unhappen it. She spread her hand flat over the aching coal beneath her ribs, and to her own quiet astonishment, she found that she did not want it gone. That was when she heard the second tread. This one, she did not know. It came without weight, the deliberate soundlessness of a foot that means not to be heard. And every hair on her arms rose at once. She was already moving when the shape filled her doorway, tall and wrapped and faceless, and the moonlight ran down the length of something narrow and bright in its hand. There was no question of why. Some part of her had known since the hall. A king's exposed weakness could not be left standing in an attic where anyone might find it. The blade came for her. And Nev, cornered, with nowhere left to be small, reached at last for the very thing she had spent 19 years being taught to smother. The thing coiled cold and waiting at the root of her, and she did not push it down. She let it rise. By the time the sun came over the eastern wall, the girl was gone, and so was every trace of her. They brought word to the king in the gray hour, before the hall had emptied of its northern guests, and Varric heard it standing at the high window of his solar, with his back to the room, which was how he heard most things he did not wish his face to answer for. The tracker was one of his best, a lean old woman named ID, who had run the borders for 30 years and had never once come back empty. She came back empty, gone. How? The king said. Gone. Entire, my lord. Idea sounded shaken, which Varric had not known she could be. I have had my nose in that attic since the third bell. There is nothing there. Not a week's scent. Not a night's. Not the girl who slept on that pallet since she was a pup. She hesitated. It is as though no one has ever set foot in that room in the whole life of this keep. I have never in my years smelled a nothing like it. The king said nothing, for a long moment. Outside, the marsh birds were waking, and somewhere below in the yard the northern horses were being readied, and the piece he had bought with 3 ugly words was holding, exactly as he had meant it to hold. He had told himself, walking away from her in the hall, that this was mercy. That a mate acknowledged was a mate targeted, that the safest place in all the world for that girl was to be worth nothing to him in the eyes of every wolf watching. He had told himself he was protecting her. He had not counted on the wound. He had not known that refusing a true bond would feel like this, like a hook set behind the breastbone and dragging, so that even now, even wanting to think of the treaty and the border and his dead father's unfinished work, his whole ruined animal self strained toward a girl whose name he had never troubled to learn. There was blood on the sill, ID said quietly, not hers, and a mark in the sill's wood, a hand's breadth long, made by a blade, my lord, and not a kitchen one. She let that sit. She did not simply run. Someone went up that stair after her. Behind him the door opened, and Varric did not need to turn to know the even, unhurried tread. You will forgive me for saying so, said Casimir smoothly, but this is a great deal of grief over a scullery girl who spied her way to the high table and fled when she was found out. The northern king rides content. The binding stands. I would call that a fortunate night's work, and think no more on the girl. He inclined his head. Whatever she was. The king turned at last, and the look on his face sent even the warden's smooth voice quiet. Because Varric had spent the sleepless hours since the hall doing the one thing a king is meant to do, which is to remember his own history, and he had arrived somewhere he did not like, a wolf that leaves no scent, he said, slowly. Not a masked scent, not a covered one, none at all. Tell me, Casimir, in all your reading, when last did our kind speak of such a thing? The warden's face did not change, and that in itself was an answer, because the warden's face always changed when he wished it to. The vial, Varric said. And the old word tasted like ash, the ghost line. The scentless wolves, his own ancestors, had hunted through the winter forests until the snow closed over the last of them, because a wolf you cannot track is a wolf you cannot trust, and a wolf you cannot bond is a wolf no alpha can hold. 100 years gone, a story to frighten pups. They were set to be dead to the last. They were, Casimir agreed a shade too quickly. And yet, the king said, it seems I have just called 1-0 in front of 2 packs, and then let someone put a blade through her window, while she was still bleeding from the first wound I gave her. He crossed to the tracker. Idea. The blood, on the sill. Whose? That I can find, my lord. Her old eyes were flint now. That one still has a scent. Varric looked out again at the paling sky, at the yard, at the horses, at the whole hard-won peace, balanced on a lie he had told to keep a girl safe, and had instead very nearly gotten her killed. His wolf paced the walls of him, and would not lie down. He had denied his own mate to a room full of witnesses, and by sunrise her scent had vanished from the world, as if she had never drawn breath in it. Let the whole realm believe she had run. Let Casimir counsel him to forget. He was going to find her. And when he did, he was going to find out first who had climbed that stair, and second, what his oldest and most trusted adviser had so very nearly let slip. The keep did not know her, and that was the strangest part of coming home. She had been gone a whole season. Autumn had stripped the marsh birches and laid the first hard frost across the reeds by the time Neve came back down the north road to Dunsero, and she came on her own 2 feet, and she came changed. The girl who had gone out that window bleeding had spent the long, cold months learning the shape of the thing that had saved her life. She could hold the nothing about herself, now the way a diver holds a breath, drawing it close or letting it thin at will. And she had learned, slowly, painfully, that her scentlessness was not a lack, not the half-a-wolf shame Casimir had pressed into her across all her years. It was a door. A wolf who can close the door on her own scent is a wolf. No one can track, no one can name, and no one, she had come to discover, can quite manage to remember. That was the part she had not expected. A wolf knows a face by the scent that lives beneath it. Take the scent away and the face turns stranger, no matter how many years an eye has rested on it. She had tested it in the villages along the road, walking up to folk who ought to have known a traveler from the morning and found her a stranger by nightfall. Their eyes slid off her. Their noses swore no one was there. So she was not afraid, coming back through the gate. She had scrubbed 1,000 times that the guards would know the water girl. Their wolves told them only that a stranger had come. A woman who smelled of nothing at all, and nothing frightens a wolf more reliably than nothing. She had not come back for the king. She told herself that firmly and often. She had come back because a blade had come through her window in the dark, and she would not spend the rest of her life flinching at shadows without knowing whose hand had held it. That hand had begun its work here, in this keep, at this high table. And there was a second reason she liked even less, which was that all along the road she had heard the talk of the marshes, the grain that never came, the tides gone to smoke, the border companies left short of spears with the treaty barely dry, and it had all sounded so wretchedly familiar that she could not make herself leave it be. There was one lever Exile could pull that no scullery girl ever could. Word had run the whole length of the realm that the young king of Ashrieve was hunting any trace of the scentless line, any rumor, any ghost. So, the ghost walked up to his hall and offered him the one thing he wanted, herself, her knowledge, not her name. They brought her to him in the small council room, and Neve, who had carried water past this man and been looked through like a pane of glass, stood before him now and was looked at. "They tell me," the king said, "that you leave no scent." "They tell you true, my lord." He came around the table searching the air for her the way everyone did, and finding nothing, and she watched the old confusion cross his face, the wolf in him insisting that a person stood there, while the nose swore the room was empty. But there was something else in his face, something she had not braced for, a kind of arrested stillness, as though some very part of him strained toward her and could not say why. She kept her own face smooth as a frozen pond. Her bond, the coal that had never once gone cold, flared so hard at his nearness that she marveled he could not hear it ringing. "What are you?" he said, not cruelly. It was the first time in her life that anyone at that table had asked her a question as though her answer might matter. "I am the last of a thing your grandfathers hunted into the snow," she said. "You may call me Sina. And I think, my lord, that you have troubles you have not shared with your warden, or you would not be trawling the whole realm for ghost stories." Something kindled behind his weather-gray eyes, interest, respect, even. And it landed on her like a palm pressed to a bruise. because this, precisely this, was how he might have looked at her that night in the hall, if only she had been anyone at all except the girl who mopped his floors. "Tell me what a ghost knows about migraine," she sat. And they were still bent low over the same worries when the door opened without a knock, and the warden Casimir came in and stopped. His eyes went to her and stayed. Longer than a stranger. Warranted. Longer than was comfortable. His clever face did not move, but something behind it was working, reaching, almost closing its hand on a thing just out of reach. "My lord," he said slowly, and he did not look away from her. "Who is your guest?" The warden did not know her, but he had come within a breath of it, and a breath was enough to keep Knave from sleeping. The king had given his ghost a name to the household, and a room off the old library, and he had told Casimir only that the woman was a scholar of the scentless line, come to trade her knowledge for his protection. It was near enough to true that Nev did not have to lie outright, which was a small mercy, for she had lied enough for one lifetime and had lost the taste for it. She kept to the library. She kept the door on her own scent drawn shut, so that even when the warden passed her in a corridor, his wolf would insist the corridor was empty, and she watched. The realm was sick. She had felt it from underneath her whole life without ever holding the whole shape of it, but from the king's council room the shape came clear at last. Grain, requisitioned in the king's name, and delivered to no one. Spears bought, and never racked. The border companies along the Vihas marches, the very men the treaty was meant to spare, left thin and cold and quietly furious, so that if the peace so much as wobbled, there would be no strength left to hold the line, and the war would come back worse than it had gone away. Someone was hollowing the realm from the inside while the king smiled over his banquets and signed his careful treaty. Someone patient, someone deeply trusted. She had believed once that she carried her own grievances about this keep and how it was run, standing over the king's ledgers now, hearing her own old complaints in her head. She was no longer certain whose they had ever been. The strike came on the 9th night. She was crossing the dark yard from the library to the well when she heard it. The wrongness underneath the ordinary sounds. A scrape of leather where no honest foot should be. She had walked this yard as a servant 1,000 times, and knew its every true noise. This was not one of them. She was moving before the first of them had cleared the shadow of the granary. 3 of them, rapt and silent, and they did not come for her. They came for the lit window above, where the king sat late over the very ledgers she had set before him. Nev did the thing the cold months had taught her, the thing no wolf ever expects. She let the door on her scent fall open, then slammed it shut, then open again, so that to the hunters in the dark, she guttered in and out of the world like a failing candle, here and gone, and here, a scent that could not be fixed upon. It broke them for the half-breath she needed. She took the first man off his feet before he understood that the empty yard had teeth. The second turned, blade already rising, and she went scentless entire, and stepped inside his swing out of nowhere and put him down hard against the well-stones. The third one ran. The king was on the stair, by then his sword bare, and he found her standing over 2 wrapped shapes in a yard that smelled of no one at all. "You are bleeding," he said. She was. The second man's blade had opened her forearm on the way down, and she had not felt it happen. She was staring at the fallen men, at the wrappings, at the short curved blades loosening in their hands, thin and hooked like a paring of the moon, and the cold was climbing her spine, because she had seen a blade of exactly that make once before, close enough to feel it pass a breath from her. She had spent a whole season failing to forget the curve of it. "My lord," she said, and her voice did not sound like her own. "These men learned their trade in no barracks of yours, and they have come for you before this night." She lifted the nearest blade into the torchlight and turned its thin crescent edge to the flame, the same wicked hook of steel a stranger had carried up her own stair in the dark. "I have carried the shape of this blade in my head for a whole season," she said. "It belonged to the man who was sent to kill me." The king did not answer at once. He was looking at her in a way he had not before, not the wary fascination he gave the scentless marvel who had walked into his hall, but something steadier and warmer and far more dangerous to her. She had stepped between two trained blades and his life, and taken a cut doing it, and never made a sound. "You do not even like me, Sina," he said quietly. "No," she agreed, pressing her sleeve to the wound. "And I would do it again." Both halves were true. And she could not have said, in that torchlit yard, which of them frightened her more. She had come back to the keep to hunt a killer. No one had thought to warn her that the hardest thing she would hunt there would be her own heart. The wound on her arm knit in a few days the way a wolf's wounds do. The other thing did not knit at all. She had meant to watch the king the way she now watched everything coolly, from behind the closed door of herself, weighing him for guilt, for the hand that might have signed her death along with the rest. Instead, she kept finding the man. He came to the library at odd hours with a lamp and a question, and stayed for the answer, and then stayed on past it, listening to her map the realm from the bottom up as though she were showing him a country he had ruled his whole life, and never once been let to see. He did not flinch from the nothing where her scent should have been. He had simply decided that she was there, and he kept on deciding it. Her bond had never closed. She had spent a season ordering it to, and it had refused, and now every hour near him was an hour with a coal held to the inside of her ribs, glowing hotter the closer he came. When his hand brushed hers over a page, she felt it to the shoulder. When he laughed, the rare unguarded laugh that seemed to surprise even him, the coal flared so bright she had to look away. It was not the bond she knew that made her listen each evening for his tread on the library stair. It was on one of those late nights that he told her, not knowing that he was telling her. They had been speaking of nothing, of the frost and the marsh, and then of the binding rite that had gone so wrong. And Neve, who could never leave a wound alone, asked him lightly whether it was true what the household still whispered, that the king had found his mate in the very hall and turned her out. He was silent so long, she thought she had gone too far. "It is true," he said at last, looking into the lamp. "I found her in the worst moment a man could find her, in front of 2 packs and a piece I had bled a year to build. And I looked at the one soul in the whole world made to stand beside me, and I called her nothing, and I had her put out like a beggar." His jaw worked. "I told myself it was mercy, that a mate I claimed aloud was a mate my enemies could reach through, and that the kindest thing I could do was make her worthless in every watching eye in that room." He shook his head slowly. "By morning she was gone, not fled, gone entire, the way you are gone when I close my eyes and reach for you. No scent, no trace, as though the world had taken me at my word and simply unmade her. I have kept every tracker in the realm on it, for a season. There is nothing to find. There is never anything to find." Neve sat very still, and listened to the man who had broken her grieve aloud for the breaking, and did not know that he was doing it to her own face. "I would give the crown to have that hour back," he said. "I did the coldest thing I have ever done, and told myself it was love, and I will go to my grave, not knowing whether that was true or only the lie a coward tells so that he can sleep." He looked up at her, then at the woman with no scent, and something crossed his face that she did not dare to read. "You must think me a poor sort of king." "No," she said, and her voice was not as steady as she wished. "I think you are a man who did a cruel thing for a reason he believed in, and lost everything he had for it. I have known far worse men who slept far easier." She never could fix, afterward, which of them had moved. Only that the space across the table was suddenly gone, and his hand was at her jaw, careful as though she might come apart under his fingers. And then he was kissing her. Every cold and watchful thing in Neve came apart at once. She had spent a whole season learning to be a nothing the world could not touch, and here was the one man alive who could reach straight through all of it, who had reached through it once already, across a crowded hall, and wrecked her for it, and she let him. She kissed him back, and felt the low sound it dragged out of him, and for one long, ruinous moment, there was no keep, and no crown, and no lie between them, only the warmth of him and the coal in her chest, gone up into open flame. It was she who broke it. She turned her face aside, breathing hard, her brow against his, and the truth stood up in her like a drawn blade. He was not kissing her. He was kissing a stranger named Sina, a scentless ghost with no past that he could reach. The woman he was grieving, the maid he would trade his crown to have back, was the very one now in his arms, and he did not know it because she had made certain he never could. Senna, he said against her hair, wrecked and tender. That was the worst of it. He said the wrong name so gently. It put the cold straight back into her, colder than any blade in the yard, and she stepped out of his hands before her own mouth could betray her, before she could give him the true name and undo them both. "Forgive me, my lord," she said, smooth as still water. "That was a mistake. It will not happen again." She left him there in the lamplight and climbed to her room, with her heart in pieces, for the second time in a season over the same man, and understood, as she climbed, that she could not keep this up much longer. A woman cannot hunt a man's enemy and love him and lie to him with every breath forever. Something was going to give. It gave the next morning, though not in the way she had feared. Word ran through the keep, like cold water down a wall. The king would honor the binding after all. At the coming full moon, before both gathered packs, Varric of Ashrieve would take Selene of the Voss to mate and seal the peace for good. Neve stood in the library with the news settling over her like frost, and understood that the man who had wept to her only last night for the mate he threw away meant to stand up before the whole world in 3 nights' time and bind himself, willing, to another. And she understood one thing more, quieter and far more dangerous than the rest. She was not going to be able to let him. There is a particular silence a hall makes when 300 wolves are all pretending not to watch one another, and Neve had come to know it very well. The moot for the binding was held at the full of the moon, in the great hall of Duncrow, with the doors thrown wide to the cold so that the moon itself could stand as witness. Both packs filled the benches, Ashrieve on the one side and the Vates on the other, and between them on the dais stood the king, and the Princess Selene, and the ancient bloodstone cup that had bound the alphas of the realm since before the vial were hunted into story. Neve stood where the king's advisor stood now, near the dais, in grey again by her own choosing, because grey was what a ghost ought to wear to a wedding that was going to gut her. She had told herself all that day that she would let it happen. The peace was real. The boys freezing in the reeds were real. Her own ruined heart was a small thing weighed against a war, and she had spent her whole life being taught that small things should keep quiet. What was one more? The king found her in the passage behind the dais, in the last hush before the horns. "You came," he said. "You are about to bind yourself to a stranger to hold the peace," she said. "Someone who cares whether you live through it ought to be watching the room." Something moved in his face. The raw, unguarded thing she had glimpsed only once or twice, the man beneath the crown. "I have done the sums 100 ways," he said low. "There is no arrangement of them where I keep the thing I want, and the realm keeps its peace. So, I will keep the peace. So, I will keep the peace. And I will spend the rest of my life being very good at seeming glad of it." He looked at her, at the woman with no scent, with a naked, helpless honesty that undid her worse than any touch. "I only wanted one soul in that hall to know it cost me something. I chose you. Forgive me the weight of it." She could not answer. Her whole heart was in her throat, and the truth was crowded in there with it, and she swallowed both down, because the horns had begun. The rite is old, and it is simple. The 2 alphas drink from the one cup, and the moon looks on, and 2 packs become kin. Selene took the cup first, pale and composed, and raised it. And Neve, whose scentless dark had honed her own nose to a blade, across the long season, caught it then, under the wine and the moonlight, and the crush of bodies, a wrongness. A thin, bitter, green thread, woven down into the bloodstone, so faint that not one wolf in that hall of 300 noses had marked it, because every last one of them was busy smelling the pack across the aisle. She moved before she had decided to. "Do not drink." Her voice cracked across the silent hall like ice, giving way on a lake. Selene froze with the cup at her lips. The whole moot, turned as one. And Neva crossed the dais, in front of 2 packs, and lifted the ancient cup out of the princess's hands. "There is nightshade in this cup," she said, "or something near enough to stop an alpha's heart between one breath and the next." She turned it so the king could see the faint green film clinging where the wine had stood, and whoever wished this binding to end in blood, wished it to look like Ashrev's doing, a foreign princess struck dead at your king's own right. From your king's own cup, she lifted her eyes to the Voss benches, to the grim old wolf at their head, who had come slowly to his feet. "There is your war, my lords. Someone has taken a great deal of trouble to hand it to you tonight." The hall came apart. For one breath, it was the war come back to life, inside 4 walls. The Vahas surged up off their benches with a growl running the whole length of them, and their old king's face went from grief to something far older and far more dangerous. And up and down both sides of the aisle hands were dropping to hilts at once. 9 years of killing along the river marches did not simply die because 2 kings had signed a page. It had only ever been sleeping, just under the skin of every wolf in that hall, and the green thread in the cup had woken the whole of it in a single heartbeat. "Ashreeve poisons its guests under a flag of truce," a northern voice roared, and half the hall roared back, and the whole night tipped to the very edge of the drop. Then the king moved. Vyric stepped down from the dais, and into the middle of the floor, into the dangerous empty ground between the 2 packs. And he did the one thing no wolf in that hall expected of a king with a war breaking open around him. He took the poisoned cup out of Neva's hands, and he raised it high so that both packs could see it plain, and then he tipped it out onto the stones at his own feet, wine and poison and all spilling the proof to make a point of it. "If any wolf under this roof believes I would harm a bride at my own right," he said, and his voice went out over the din without once climbing to meet it, "then he does not know his enemy, and he does not know me. I did not do this thing. And I will find the hand that did, tonight, before both your kings, or I will give my own life on this floor and spare you the trouble of a war." He turned slow in the center of the hall, meeting one furious eye and then the next. "But I will not stand here and watch 9 years of dead boys buy us nothing, because one coward with a vial wanted his war handed back to him. Sit, all of you, sit down, and let me show you the truth of it." It took him the better part of an hour even so, and Nev watched him spend every minute of it. She watched the crown go back on over the bare man she had seen in the passage, watched him face down the grieving northern king with the emptied cup for evidence and his own bared throat for surety, and she understood that whatever else Varric of Ashreeve was, he was not a small king. He stood in the gap and held 2 furious packs apart, with nothing but his voice and his will, and not once, in all of it, did he raise it. Selene found her at the edge of the emptying hall. Up close the knife-cold princess only looked young and shaken and grateful. "You had no reason on earth to do that," she said. "I am the woman marrying the man you watch, the way you watch him. Do not imagine I have not seen it." Neva said nothing. Selena studied her a moment, then inclined her head, one queen to another. "Whatever you are, ghost, you have my father's house in your debt, and we are a people who do not forget a debt." Nav did not climb to her room when it was done. The poison had told her something at last, something she had been circling for a whole season without daring to name it. Whoever had done this had the free run of the keep, the trust of the king, and the patience of a man who had waited years for his moment. She knew only one wolf, who was all 3 at once. So, while the whole keep still boiled upstairs, she went down to the warden's chambers, and she let herself in, and by the light of a shuttered lamp, she began, quickly and silently, to go through Casimir's private papers. She was 3 drawers deep, a folded sheet in her hand that had turned her blood to meltwater. When the door opened behind her, she turned. The king stood in the doorway, and his face, when he saw where she was and what she was holding, was a terrible thing to look upon. "Senna," he said very quietly, "what are you doing in my warden's rooms?" There are lies that come apart the instant you say them aloud, and Neve had run clean out of the other kind. She could have lied. A season ago she would have, smoothly, without a flicker. She had a false answer, half-shaped on her tongue even now, some small tale of a mislaid ledger. She watched the king watch her decide not to tell it. "It is exactly what it looks like," she said. "And nothing at all like what you are afraid of." She held up the folded sheet. "Your warden has been bleeding your realm toward a war for 3 years, my lord. The grain, the spears, the thin companies dying slow on the marches. It was never rot and it was never ill luck. It was a hand, his hand. And tonight, that same hand ground nightshade into your binding cup, because a war that lights itself is a great deal tidier than a war a man has to declare in his own name." She braced for his disbelief. It did not come. What came instead stopped her where she stood. The king crossed the room, took the sheet from her fingers, read it, and shut his eyes. And when he opened them, there was no shock in them at all. Only a bottomless weariness, and something that might almost have been relief. "I know," he said. "You knew. I have known, the better part of a year, that someone close to me was steering us onto the rocks. I have suspected Casimir for half of it." He set the sheet down. "But knowing is not proof, and Casimir is not a wolf you accuse on a suspicion. He is an old name. He holds the loyalty of half the border lords, and the memory of every soul who served my father. Move on him with less than a certainty no wolf alive could argue against, and I do not put down a traitor. I light the very war he has been building. With my own pack torn down the middle, his jaw hardened. Tyrant's jail, whoever frightens them and marvel at the knife 3 winters on. I could not afford to be a tyrant. So I have built my case in the dark, alone, for a year and waited for him to reach too far." He looked at her. "And then a scentless woman walked into my hall and began pulling the very same thread from the other end." "Why?" Nev said, and her voice had gone strange in her own ears. "Why? Tell me any of this. You do not know me. I am a ghost you took in on a whim." "No," he said slow. And he was looking at her now in a way that made her go still, the way a wolf looks when a thing long sunk begins to rise. "No. And that is the part I cannot account for. I do not know you. And I have never in all my life been so sure of anyone." He took a step toward her. "When you crossed that dais tonight, when you put yourself between a poisoned cup and a woman you have every reason in the world to hate, I felt a thing I have felt exactly once before in this keep, a season ago. Over a girl in grey, I called nothing, and have not stopped grieving since. And Neve's control, which had held through every trial for a whole season, chose that moment to fail her. It was only for a breath, a single breath. But grief and terror, and a year of swallowed wanting, cracked the door she kept barred, and for one instant, her true scent bloomed into the room. The real one, the one he had caught for a single heartbeat across a crowded hall, and then hunted the length of a realm to find again. The king went rigid to the bone. She watched it reach him. She watched it go through him like a blade driven slow, the recognition, the impossible sum of it, the mate scent he would have known in his sleep, pouring off the scentless stranger he had been falling for night after night in a lamplit library. "It is you," he breathed. And then, before the joy could finish crossing his face, she watched the rest of it arrive. The girl he had called nothing, put out like a beggar, bled in her own attic, gone by sunrise. Come back, scentless and false, to hunt beneath his roof. His whole face broke open on it. "Nay," she said, and gave him at last the name he had never once troubled to learn. "My name is Knave, and yes, I am the mate you threw away." He reached for her, and she stepped back, and he stopped, because he had learned by now that when she stepped back, he must stop. "You have had your reveal, my lord," she said. "Now I will have mine, for I only understood it myself within the hour." She lifted the folded sheet between them again, and her hand was shaking now. "Do you know whose hand raised me? Who found a scentless child at 9 winters, and gave her a roof and a name, and taught her one single lesson, over and over, until it was the whole floor she stood her life upon? A wolf with no scent is half a wolf. Be small, be quiet. Be grateful you are born at all." Her voice split clean down its middle. It was Casimir. He knew what I was. He knew it was no defect, but a power. The one thing that could make a wolf untrackable and unbondable and unowned. And he spent 10 patient years teaching me to be ashamed of the only thing about me no one could ever hold. He kept me small on purpose. He kept me his. The king had gone white to the lips. Neve, please. He was at your ear in the hall, she said. That night, when you looked at me and knew me, whose counsel set the word nothing in your mouth. The silence answered for him. So you see how it is, Nave said. And now she let the tears come. We were both of us his instruments. You rejected your own mate on the counsel of the man steering you to ruin, and he sent a knife to my window that same night to be certain the loose thread was cut. He built the cruelest hour of both our lives. And he built the whole of me, besides. And I have only now, standing in his rooms with the proof of it in my fist, understood that I have never once in 19 years had a single thought I could be sure was my own. She laid the sheet flat against his chest. Bring him down, my lord. You have your certainty now. Bring him down, and let the boys in the reeds grow old. She moved past him toward the door, and then, let me be. I have spent 19 years being what other wolves made of me. I should like to spend what is left being no one's at all. Nav, his voice cracked. Please, I did not know. But she was already gone into the dark of the corridor, the way she was so very good at going. The way he had let her people be taught to go. And the king of Ashrieve was left holding the proof of his enemy, and the name of his mate and the ruin of the second time he had watched her walk away from him. Duxmer came to her at first light, which was how Neve knew that he already understood he had lost. He found her in the cold library, and he did not trouble with the kind old uncle's face any longer, and that was how she knew the game had truly turned. He drew a chair up before her and sat in it unhurried as ever a wolf had sat, and folded his long, clever hands in his lap. So, he said, my little ghost is my little Neve. I confess I did wonder. You always did have a gift for standing, where you had no business standing. He tilted his head at her. And you have been in my rooms. I have. Then you know a great deal more than is good for you, and we are neither of us served by pretending otherwise. He smiled, thin and cold and entirely without warmth. Let me tell you how tonight will go, child, because I raised you, and I will spare you if you let me. The Voss king believes his daughter was nearly killed beneath this roof. He believes, rightly. By nightfall he will want a reckoning for it, and I mean to give him one. The king's. He said it as gently as he had said everything cruel to her across the years, as though he were doing her a kindness by letting her in on it early. And he watched her face while he said it, the way a man watches a tool for the first sign of a crack. He laid it out for her, then the way he had laid out everything, all her life, patient and reasonable and mild, so that the monstrous thing came to sound like the only sensible one. Varric would be named. The poisoned cup, the hollowed stores, all of it turned and dressed to fit a jealous boy king who had come to prize a vanished mate above the peace itself, and would rather see the binding fail in blood than share his hall with a bride he had never wanted. And the wolf whose word would nail it fast, the one witness the Voss king would believe over any noble in that hall, was to be the king's own wronged mate, the scorned girl he had called nothing before all the world. You will stand before Halvard tonight, Casimir said gently, and you will tell him what your king truly is. And when Varric falls, the border lords will cast about for a steady hand to hold the realm, and they will find mine waiting, and there will be no war, because there will be no reckless boy left alive to start one. He reached out then, and, for the first time in a season, laid his hand against her cheek, and she made herself hold still beneath it. I did keep you small, Neve. I will not insult you by denying it now, but small things live. Look at you. Every wolf who stood tall that night is dead, or fled, or broken, and here you sit, whole. I taught you that. Come and be useful one last time, and I will see you kept safe and warm to the end of your days. For a moment, God's help her, it worked. That was the true horror of it. Some worn old groove in her, cut deep by 10 years of that patient voice, wanted nothing in the world so much as to say yes. He was offering her the only two things she had ever been permitted to want: safety and his approval, and he was offering them in the one voice her whole self had been built to obey, and Varric had wronged her. That was the poison folded into it, the real poison, worse than anything that had ever sat in the cup. Casimir was not asking her to lie about a good man. He was asking her to tell a hall full of wolves that the king who had called her nothing deserved to fall. And some small ruined thing in her, the part that still flinched from that night, on the flags, wanted with a shameful hunger for it to be true. And Neve, gazing into the face of the only father she had ever been given, felt the old terrible ease of him, the pull of simply doing what Casimir said, and understood at last exactly how a clever person is made a fool of. It is never done by force. It is done with a hand laid gentle on the cheek, and a patient voice that has always been the one to tell you what you are. She lowered her eyes, the way he had taught her to lower them. She let her shoulders draw in, small, the way he had always liked them. Yes, Casimir, she said softly, I will do it. His smile spread wide, satisfied, certain of her. He had built this instrument with his own hands. He knew, to the last note, how it played. He had forgotten one thing only. He had taught her himself, across 10 patient years, how to seem like nothing at all, while she was already gone. The council was called, in the high hall an hour past moonrise, and every wolf who mattered in 2 packs came to watch a king be unmade. Neve came in at Casimir's side, small and gray and downcast, exactly the wronged girl the room had come expecting. She felt Varric's eyes find her. The instant she entered, the question in them, and under the question the dread. He did not know what she had come here to do. He had spent the whole night believing she might have come to bury him, and she had let him, because a trap only springs if the bait rings true. And she had needed the whole hall, Casimir, above all, sure she was still the instrument he had made. Casimir spoke first, and he was very good indeed. Grave, reluctant, a loyal old servant, sick at the news he was forced to bring. He laid the poisoned cup before Halvard. He spoke of a young king, so lost to a vanished mate, that he would sooner see a foreign bride poisoned than honor a peace he had come to resent, of stores gone quietly missing to fund a reckless crown. And then, with the sorrow of a wolf, performing a hard and holy duty, he turned to Neve. This poor child was that lost mate, he said, cast aside before both packs, and shamed before them. If any soul in this realm has cause to shield the king, it is she. And even she can no longer stomach what he is. Neve, tell his majesty of the north what manner of king rules here. Every face in the hall swung to her. Halvard leaning forward, grim and grieving for a daughter nearly lost at his host's own table. The border lords, half of them already half persuaded. And Varric, across the hall, gone very still, watching her not with a command, and not with a plea, but with a kind of terrible acceptance, as though he had decided that if this was her due, he would not say a word to keep her from taking it. That was the thing that very nearly broke her, that he would let her. She stepped forward, she lifted her chin, and she turned to the king of the north. I will tell you what my king is, she said, and her voice went out clean and level over the whole waiting hall. He is a wolf who was lied to by the man standing at my very shoulder, as was I. The hall went rigid. She did not stop. She could not. Now she laid it out fast and clear, the way Varric himself had taught her a case must be laid when a single wrong beat means blood on the floor. The short crescent blades. The stranger who had climbed to her attic the same night the king rejected her, sent to cut the one loose thread that might one day unravel a war. The stores gone, not into a king's guard, but into a patient wolf-slung purse. The nightshade in that cup was ground fine and worked down into the bloodstone hours before the rite, she said, by a hand that has held the free run of this keep for 30 years, that answers to no one. And that every wolf in this hall was raised to trust. She turned then, at last, and looked full at the man who had raised her. Was it not, Casimir? This is grief, Casimir said, and his voice was still smooth, but a thread had gone out of it that had never gone before. The child is distraught. She does not know what she says. Then a search of your chambers costs you nothing, said Neve. Now while you stand here in this hall and cannot reach them, send wolves you trust, my lords, and see whether they turn up a loyal warden's papers, or a paymaster's ledger, foreign coin, and the twin of the poison, still clinging to that cup. She held Halvard's grim eyes. I have already stood in those rooms. I know what waits in them. I ask only that noses other than mine be the ones to find it. Halvard looked at her a long, long moment. Then he nodded to two of his own northern wolves, and they went for the door, and Casimir's face changed. The grave old servant was simply gone, all at once, the way a mask comes away in a hand, and what stood in its place was cornered, and quick, and wholly without mercy. And Neve, who had spent 19 years reading that face for its weather, saw the decision cross it a half-breath before he moved. He was nearest to her. He had always meant, if it came to this, to take his instrument down into the dark with him. The blade came out of his sleeve, fast and low, straight for her. But he had made one mistake, the very same mistake he had made her whole life long. He believed he knew where she was. Neva did the very thing he had drilled into a frightened child until it was second nature, and never dreamed she would one day turn back on him. She shut the door on herself, completely, all at once, so that between one breath and the next, there was no one there to strike. His blade found only the air where she had been. She caught his knife wrist in both hands, turned in under it the way a season of hard, cold nights had taught her, and put the warden of Duncarrow flat on his back on the stones of his own high hall, the knife skittering away across the floor, her knee hard in his chest and her mouth by his ear. You taught me to vanish, she said, low, for him, and no one else. You should not have taught me so well. Then the guards were on him, Halvard's wolves and Varric's together hauling him up between them, which was a kind of peace being born in itself. And the papers came back from his rooms a few minutes after. The ledger and the coin and the little stoppered vial of green in the arms of a grim northern wolf. After that, there was nothing left for Casimir to say that a soul in 2 packs would believe. Neva got to her feet in the middle of the hall. She was shaking. Across the room the king was looking at her as though she had just hung the moon. He had been ready to let her put out forever. I did not do it for you, she told him before he could speak, because she needed it said in front of them all, needed it to be true. I did it because he was a traitor, and because there are boys still shivering on the marches who have earned the right to come home. Not one breath of it was forgiveness. I know, Varric said, quiet. I know it was not. But she saw, even as she said it, even as she meant every word, the way his face held on to the plain fact that she had saved his life anyway, and she hated that he had marked it, because it was the very same thing she had marked in herself. Peace, as it turned out, was mostly paperwork. The season that followed was the strangest of Neve's whole life. Kajnir went down into the deep cells beneath the old fort, and the rot he had worked into the realm for years was cut back out of it, strand by careful strand. The stores set right, the border companies made whole again, the long, slow bleeding of the marches finally stopped. Halvard of the Vahas, having watched a scentless girl save his daughter's life and set the whole truth in his hand, agreed to keep the peace without any marriage at all. For a king who would expose a traitor at his own cost struck him as worth a great deal more as a friend than as a son. And Selene, freed of a binding she had never once wanted, kissed Neve on the brow before she rode north, and told her she was a fool if she let her pride cost her the man, which Neve thought was rich indeed, coming from a princess. And Varric set himself, patiently, and in the open, to undo the worst thing he had ever done. He did not do it the way she had braced for. He sent no armfuls of flowers, made no grand speeches, left no gifts at her door that she would only have handed on to the poor. He did a worse thing, a thing that got clean under her guard, precisely because it asked her for nothing at all. He learned her. She understood it the first time he found her in a crowded hall, without once lifting his nose to the air. She had gone scentless out of old habit, a ghost, in a press of nobles, certain of her own invisibility, and the king had crossed, the entire room, straight to her as though she were the one lit lamp in it. "How?" she demanded, and he only said, "You set your weight on your back foot when you are ready to be gone from a room. You have done it since the night I met you." And after that, he did it again and again, found her blind, and found her sure, found her by the set of her shoulders, and the stillness of her hands, and the particular quiet she carried into a room, until she understood the thing he was telling her, without the cowardice of saying it aloud. That the wolf who had once called her invisible had taught himself to see her, with every sense, but the one that had failed them both, that she had never, for one moment, been nothing, that she never would be again. He stood up before the packs as well, and did the thing no king of Asriv had ever done. He named the Valai, under the protection of his crown. He had the true tale told, not the pup's story of scentless monsters in the snow, but the truth of it, a people run down and butchered for the sole crime of being untrackable. And he struck the old hunting law from the moot stone with his own hand. Neva stood at the very back of the hall, and watched her people be handed back their name 100 years too late, and had to slip out before anyone could see what her face was doing. He did smaller things too, quieter ones, the sort she was never meant to trace back to him. The attic she had bled out of was given over to a widow with 3 pups who had been sleeping in the stables. The water girls who did the work she had once done were given boots against the winter and a half-day's rest they had never had before, and no one could say quite where the order had come from. She only knew it was him because she knew, now, how to read a kindness that took no credit for itself, and because it was always the lowest and least regarded souls in the keep who woke to find themselves a little less forgotten. He was mending, one small unseen mercy at a time, the exact kind of neglect that had raised a scentless child to believe she was worth nothing. He never once mentioned it. That was how she knew it was meant, but she kept the door shut. She kept her scent closed and her bond banked and her heart behind the high wall where it had always been safe, because the wall had kept her alive her whole life, and she did not know how to be a living person without it. And every time he found her blind across a crowded room, every time he simply saw her, she wanted to throw that door open so badly it frightened her, and being frightened, she did the only thing fear had ever taught her to do. She stayed small, she stayed safe, she stayed shut, until the evening he stopped. He came to the library, where the whole of it had begun, and he did not sit, and he did not smile. "I have been thinking," Varric said, "that there is a kind of wanting that is only another manner of taking. I wronged you before 2 packs. I lost you. I found you and did not know you, and fell in love with you a second time, which means nothing at all, because you never once asked to be found, nor to be fallen for either time." He was very steady, and only she, who had learned him now as thoroughly as he had learned her, could see the whole of what the steadiness was costing him. "So I am going to stop, Neve. You have a place in this keep for as long as you should want one, and your people have the protection of my crown, whether you stay or go, and you will never again have to feel me across a room wanting a thing of you that you cannot give. You are free. I ought to have begun there. I am sorry. It took me twice losing you to learn it." And he inclined his head to her. The way one wolf bows to another it holds as an equal, and he turned to go. Neve stood in the lamplight with the wall around her heart, exactly as high and as safe as she had always kept it, and felt the whole of it begin to come down, because she understood at last precisely what she had been doing. She was keeping herself small. She was keeping herself safe. She was doing to herself, with her own 2 hands, the very thing Casimir had spent 10 years doing to her, and she had been calling it strength. "Varric," she said. He stopped. When she stepped back, he had learned to stop. And now she watched him learn a new thing, which was to wait there, at the door, while she decided whether she would come out at last from behind the wall. He waited at the door, and Neve came out from behind her wall, the only way she had ever known how, which was all at once, the way she did every single thing that frightened her. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you since the night you called me nothing, which is the stupidest thing I have ever done, and I have hated you the whole while as well, and I do not know how to carry both at once, and I have been trying to keep myself safe by keeping myself shut, and I am so tired, Varric. I am so tired of being small. He crossed the room. He did not touch her yet. He had learned that too. Then be the other thing, he said, low and rough. Be as large as you truly are. I have seen it. I have been trying to tell you for a whole season that I have seen it. There is nothing small about you, and there never was. That was his lie. It was never once yours. I know, she whispered. I am only just now learning how to believe it. He was near enough to touch her now, and he did not. And she understood that he was waiting, as he had waited at every door since she came home, for her to close the last of the distance on her own. So she did. She fisted her hand in the front of his shirt, the way she had that first ruinous night in this same room, and she pulled him down, and she kissed the king of Ashrieve in the lamplight, where she had first let herself want him, and this time she did not pull away, and this time he wept, quietly, which somehow she had known that he would. But she drew back at last, her hand still on him, because there was one thing more, and it was the hardest of all, and she made herself say it. It is not enough, she said, and felt him go still with fear, and shook her head quickly. Not us. Us is enough. But you unmade me in front of the whole world, Varric. You called your own mate nothing where 2 packs could hear you do it, and no matter how many times you find me blind across a room, that wound was made in the open, and it will not close in the dark. If you would have me, you will have to want me where every one of them can see it, in the same hall, under the same moon. The king of Ashrieve looked at her a long moment, and then, slowly, he smiled. And it was not the crown's easy smile at all, but the other one, the one that belonged only to the man underneath it. I was hoping, he said, that you would ask me for exactly that. He called the packs to Duncarrow at the next full moon, both of them, Ashrieve on the one hand and the Vihos on the other, into the great hall with its doors flung wide to the cold and the moon standing witness. Exactly as they had gathered on the night it all began. The benches filled, the whispers ran along them. A king did not summon 2 packs to a moot without a binding in the offing, and there was no bride anywhere in sight, and the hall had no notion what it had been called to witness. Neva stood where the servant stood, at the edge of it, by the pillar in grey, because she had wanted to stand in the exact place she had stood the night he cast her out. And the king came down off the dais, in front of the 2 packs, and the peace, and the moon, and he walked through the parting crowd, the way he had walked it, once before, straight toward the girl in grey beside the pillar. Only this time, when the whole hall had gone silent, to see where his hunger would land, he stopped before her and went down on one knee. The hall made a sound, like the tide drawing out. A season ago, the king said, and he pitched his voice to carry to the farthest cold corner of that hall, I stood upon that dais, and I looked at my own true mate, the one soul in all the world made to stand at my side, and I was afraid, and I let a traitor set a lie in my mouth, and I called her nothing in front of every one of you. It was the coldest and most cowardly thing that I have ever done. I have paid for it every day since, and I will go on gladly, paying for the rest of the days I am given. He looked up at her, and there was no crown at all in his face now. Her name is Neve. She is the last of the Vale whom my grandfathers wronged, as I wronged her. She has saved my life 3 times over, and my realm once, and my own soul more times than I can rightly count, and she owes me nothing under this moon, and I am asking her anyway. Here, in the light, where I broke it, his voice went rough. Be my mate, Neve, not my ghost, not my secret kept in a library, my mate and my queen, and let every wolf in this hall bear witness to a king begging for the thing he was fool enough to throw away. And Neve, standing in the very place where she had been named nothing, looked down at the man kneeling before 2 packs, with his whole bare heart held up to the moonlight, and she reached at last for the door she had kept, barred her entire life, the one Casimir had taught her hands to hold shut, the one that had saved her and starved her in equal measure across all her winters. She opened it. She let her scent come home. It rose up out of her like the first true warmth after a long killing winter, and it filled the hall, and it rolled out across 300 lifted heads, the real scent she had carried out that attic window on the worst night of her life, and never once let the world have since. And braided all the way through it, unmistakable, blazing, came the bond, the mate truth the king had denied in his fear. And now every wolf in that hall could drink it in for themselves, undeniable and plain as a sunrise. The scent that had vanished by one sunrise a season gone came home in front of the whole waiting world. Varric's breath left him like a man struck through. He knew it. Of course, he knew it. He had grieved it a whole season, and hunted it the length of a realm. "There you are," he said, "wrecked and shining. Gods above, there you are." "Here I am," said Neve, and she was weeping now and did not care one whit who saw it. "No more vanishing. Ask me out loud, Varric, where they can all of them hear it. Will you have me?" said the king. "Yes," said Neve. "I vanished by a single sunrise once. I mean to be found by everyone that comes after." And she pulled him up off his knee and into her arms, and the great hall of Duncarrow, which had watched a king unmake his own mate a season before, and said not one word, came apart all at once into a roar that shook the very moon in the doorway. They bound themselves under the next full moon, and this time no wolf poisoned the cup, for the one who used to see to such quiet work was breaking stone in the deep cells beneath the old fort, and would be at it for the rest of his long life. The whole of Ashrieve turned out for it, and a good part of the Vihos besides, and they came not out of duty, the dull way packs come to a peace, but out of something far rarer, because the story had got loose the way the good ones always do. The boy king who threw his own mate away and then knelt before 2 packs to beg her back, the scentless ghost girl who saved his life 3 times over before she would so much as forgive him. It was the kind of tale wolves would be telling their pups 100 years on, and telling it right this time. Neve did not wear grey. She stood upon the dais where she had once carried a cup in mortal terror, and she let her scent fill the hall on purpose. The whole of it. The very thing she had spent 19 winters being taught to smother down to nothing. And she watched the wolves of 2 packs breathe in the bond of their king and their queen, and find that it was good. Somewhere out in the press stood the last scattered handful of her people, come down out of the far snows at a king's true and open invitation. Ghosts no longer, hunted no longer, handed back their name in the light. There was no cup that anyone need fear, and no traitor at anyone's ear, and when the moon came fully over the open doors, the 2 alphas of the realm drank from the one bloodstone cup, and the packs became kin in earnest. At last, the way they had failed to on the bloody night this whole tale began. Halvard of the Vihos stood witness at the king's right hand, and if a hard old northern wolf wept a little to see it, no one in that hall was unkind enough to say so. Varric found her hand. He had a way of finding her now, scent or no scent, that she had long since given up pretending not to love. No, he murmured. There was a moment that first night, in this hall, before I ruined everything, when I looked at you across the room and thought there she is. The whole of my life, standing by a pillar, holding a cup. And then I let a frightened, cruel little voice talk me out of the truest thing I have ever known in my life. He raised her hand to his mouth. "I mean to be making that up to you, until the day I die. I am counting on it," said Neve. And so it was that the Alpha King who rejected his true mate and lost her scent by sunrise, and searched a whole realm for a ghost, learned in the end that the only way to be sure of her was to see to it that she was never made into nothing again. He had denied the bond in the dark of his own fear. He would spend the rest of his life claiming it in the light. And every morning after, when the sun came up over the eastern wall of Duncarrow, the queen who had once vanished by a sunrise was there beside him still, scent and bond and heart and all, having decided at the last that some things in this world are worth being found for.